let me know when you're ready.
Oh, I am.
So behind me here is St Andrew's Church. We're going to have a little look around the church itself and the graveyard because it's quite a fascinating area. The actual building is 12th century and you've got some Norman architecture. It's one of the older ones in the UK. And this graveyard, although no longer an active graveyard, if such a word is appropriate, has some exceptionally old and interesting graves. So we're going to have a look at some of the graves, some of the findings that I made as a young person, a look around inside the church itself, and just cover also some of the sort of flora and fauna that you get in this, and in particular this yew tree and its relationship these days with modern churchyards, and why you might find old yew trees in modern churchyards. So let's take a look, shall we?
This is like MTV, but instead of my crib is my crypts.
Yes, exactly. My Crypt TV.
Oh my god.
This here is a European yew tree. You'll find these common in English graveyards. Now, if my Latin's good, Taxus bacarda is the name of this thing. And the reason these trees are associated with early Christianity is originally they were worshipped by the Druids as a form of resurrection and immortality. Yew wood is particularly interesting in these trees is that they can live for an extremely long time, with averages of 800 to 1,000 years old. In fact, it's almost impossible for a yew tree to die unless it gets something like a fungus cut down or the soil is polluted. When the early Christian missionaries came in, they converted that pagan belief over to Christianity to emphasize life and resurrection, and as such yew trees are often planted around gravestones, graveyards. The yew tree itself is a fascinating tree. Not only is it one of the best woods for making longbows, again to pig stick the French, but the actual plant itself is almost entirely toxic in every aspect. You get something called taxida poisoning from it. These leaves themselves require about 50 milligrams. The wood is poisonous and the seeds are poisonous inside it. The poisoning is particularly dangerous. It causes quite quick fatalities, usually within 2 hours of ingesting it. Early signs are nausea, vomiting, dizziness, followed by tachycardia and then a fatal heart attack. So sometimes people associate the tree with death more than life, but if you take a single palm of this and it touches the ground, it will sometimes sprout a new yew tree. During the medieval period, because we don't have palms in the UK, they used to use these to represent palms and tell narrative stories. When you do see these in graveyards, they'll often be around some of the very older stones, where the older stones would have been, because they'd been planted around the base of these yew trees. So there we go. An interesting little story about yew trees and why you might find them in church graveyards. So while we're in this graveyard, we're just going to look at a few of the interesting things. A lot of these gravestones have different headpieces and different carvings in them, and there's an entire sort of language and artwork into what that actually means and what they interpret as. Over there we've got flowers with a helmet, which indicates some sort of military service. We have Celtic symbols scrawled on some of them, and one of the more common ones we see here, IHS, and here looks like IHS. This is actually from...
And what, sorry?
Well, it looks like an IH and an S.
Okay.
It's actually Greek, so you've actually got, man, I'm going to probably butcher my Greek here, but Iota, Eta, Sigma. So these are the first 3 letters of Christ's name. Some people interpret it as we conquer the name of Jesus. That's actually with a V in it. You don't see those outside of military graves so much. So if you're ever wondering what this symbol means, yes, it's a Iota, Eta, Sigma, or as we'd say it in sort of IHS. So here we have 2. These are particularly old, so they're...
Oh, I see the skulls, yeah.
So we should cover these?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so this is a particularly interesting one. Here we see a skull and crossbones. Sometimes you'll see it as a single skull holding a femur. This is what we call a memento mori, and it literally means remember that you are mortal, remember that you're going to die. These gravestones are very old when you see this. This particular style here, and very faded over there, sort of went out of fashion in about the 16th century, when you start to get a memento veriti, which is remember life. But obviously at the time these were made, mortality was a real factor. People lost a lot of children, people died at a young age.
Yep.
And rich or poor, this was here to remind you that death's coming for all of you. Morbid bunch. What they don't mean is pirate which some people seem to think. So despite popular opinion, there are not lots of buried pirates in Mottisfont churchyard. So yes, a memento mori. So one of the more interesting graves in here is this early Victorian grave. And the reason it's particularly interesting is rather than being traditionally buried and the soil filled in, this one was never filled in. It just had a brick dome put over the top and down the sides. And actually some of the brickworks collapsed. And as a young man living here, if you actually look down there, you can still see the skeleton. But these are particularly uncommon to have these types of grave. And going through the church records, there's no indication why it was done. But for whatever reason, they decided that they didn't want to be buried under the loom. And so you had this small brick vault put over the top, but with a conventional headstone. No particular explanation, but it is an interesting little artefact within this otherwise standard setup of gravestones. Before we go into the actual church to have a look around in a moment, let's talk a little bit about this building. So again, as I said, it's 12th century in its origins, built from rubble and flint upwards, and it was the burial place for all the nobility in this area as well as the common people. But one particular grave was actually discovered by myself when I was a young man here, and it always struck me as a bit of a curiosity as to why it was here. So we're going to have a look at that. We can just follow the camera. And it's this particular stone here. Obviously it's been moved here and placed here at some time, and there are no church records to its background. What's particularly interesting about this is running along it you have a single sword here. Now a sword in grave markings could indicate two things. More uncommonly it represented just a male, an unmarried male, but in more uncommon it represented someone with a military background, usually a knight, or particularly those of a knightly order such as the Knights Templar. Now this particular area did have several knights, and several people joined the order of the Knights Templar, although no lands in this particular section we're in here were given to the Templars, because those lands usually ended up donating their land and had the word temple put after it, like Sutton Temple for example. But this particular gravestone here matches the time, the period and the style, and the sword is indicative of some sort of military service. Who he was, when he died, or how this stone got here is not on the records, but it is an interesting little piece all the same. I first discovered it when I was about 12 years old, and it's been here ever since, still unknown. So if anybody has any ideas, feel free to let us know. So me and Rita are going to sort of have a look around inside this building. Again, 12th century. Parts of it have been restored over the years. It had a sort of big update in the 14th century and one in the 16th century. So sort of the original timbers have all gone. But parts of it, certainly some of the normal windows and archways and doors are still here. So let's have a look inside this little one at St Andrew, shall we? Find the step when you come in.
Wow.
There we go. So this particular font here, believe it or not, I was actually baptised in this 37 years ago. But this font, this one is 14th century Portland stone, so it hasn't changed in 800 plus years. As we move down the aisle, I'll point out some of the parts here. So a lot of the original archways here I was listed. You'd originally had a nave there. There would have been a little one off to the side here. That disappeared sometime in the 16th century. The stained glass windows to either side are 14th, and in parts 12th century up here. And when you get to some bits here we have the nobility of the period. Now these particular ones here, 1695, 1684, only 84 years old, this gentleman. As we go further on, we get the coats of arms here. And these go back into your original Latin and French in places. So the family here, husband and wife, and it looks like their daughter died at age 19. These particular ones go back here, and unfortunately my Latin's not as good as it should be, and that's very faded. One of the oldest ones is here, and this is completely faded in passage and time. This particular one is one of the oldest ones here, believed to have been about 13th century. Moving up towards the altar, and with all respect that certain things demand, we come along here, and these would have originally been the family names, and over the years obviously they would have been quite brightly coloured, as a lot of things in the church were, they've all been removed. And this particular part here would have been monks, and at some point they've been smashed off and defaced. And this might have been during Henry's little upset with the church. It might have been local vandals, there's no real way to say. But whatever was here, again, has been smoothed off and gone. So something did somebody to displease somebody along the line to have caused this. Moving on here again, some of the very oldest stained glass windows, incredibly old, very valuable, and very much a lost art now, sadly. One of the things that's quite interesting, it was just spotted me at the end, is at the top here we have what would have been a heraldic crest. Now, unlike those awful little gimmicks that you see in shops that have a display of heraldry and what your name would have meant, that mean absolutely nothing. In actual heraldry, it's passed down only from the male to the firstborn of each family. Now, in heraldic terms, this helmet at the top, this particular thing, meant that who commissioned this would have been a knight or somebody of a military order, and the actual type of hat and crest on top of it indicate your role. There was different ones for religious figures and bishops and so on, but whoever built this, although his name and the detail is long gone, would have been somebody of a military order at one point. Alas, who is not recorded. Also within the church, both here and over here, you have a list of some of the people that died during the First World War. And given the size of the small community at the time, the First World War was particularly devastating on Mottisfont, as they lost not only all their fathers, but most of their firstborn and even second-born children in the war. Here we see some of the family names that have gone back hundreds of years in this area, and you see several cases, double names, three names here, so the three brothers died. And again, in the Second World War, most of the people in this village died, and it really was, the First and Second World War really curtailed back the whole area. Interestingly enough, this is not the official village memorial, and we'll cover a little bit of that in a way, because they were quite sneaky. Unlike every other village after the wars that built a standard stone, this village did something a little bit special. So later on in our walk, we'll cover where it was and how they went about doing it. It was rather crafty, and it remains rather crafty today. But yeah, so a testament to the people that died in the village, and sadly, some of the families never recovered. So it's often been wondered where I grew up. Was it a chance encounter between two tanks? Was it a scientific lab? Neither are strictly true. This house to my left here, One Church Lane at Denbigh, this was the house I actually grew up and was raised in. Its actual history goes back to about the 16th century, although we know that the foundations in the earliest parts go back to a similar period of time as the church. It had been a much smaller thing then, consisting almost of one large room, with maybe two of those extended, and you'd have had 11 or 12 people living in that thing. So yeah, this is One Church Lane. It was my childhood house. It's been changed a lot by the National Trust over the years. My grandfather's a prolific rose grower, but a lot of those have gone. But there are still some bits of evidence as to what was here. If we come around the side of it, at some point, we certainly know that it was in the village post office, because written along the side, you can still see where it has the post office bit and the brickwork.
1 second, the sun is on the way. Woo!
So yes, you can just make out the post office under the thatch here. So here I'm stood in the middle of what's left of Mottisfont really. When I say what's left of it, sadly over the years the National Trust became more and more involved. The estate was left to them by Maud Russell, who owned Mottisfont Abbey over there. Her initial conditions to the National Trust were that any descendant of the villagers could come and live here. What she didn't stipulate, sadly, was how much rent they should pay. So sadly, the rents went up and up and up. So now the average house price around is about £3,000 a month or more, and it drove all the original villagers out. So yeah, just down here we've got the original tithe barn. Again, that goes all the way back hundreds and hundreds of years. It's been heavily restored by the National Trust. But a tithe barn, if you wanted to store things or move things, you paid a tithe. That's where you stored stuff. Behind me here was the later village post office. It used to be where you used to come and get your cream teas and do all your post and things. And the old lady that owned that, she couldn't afford the ever-increasing rent prices. Privatised house. Just over here is the village blacksmith. Certainly, I remember as a small lad, he was still making horseshoes and things in here, as well as servicing cars. And to my left, this was the Fox. This was the main pub of the village. Again, died for the same reasons. National Trust basically drove them out. All very much privatised houses, now secondary houses for people living up in London. The one thing that has been able to survive all these years, and the National Trust has tried to kill it on multiple times, is behind me. This is Mottisfont Social Club. Wait for this ugly car to come past in a minute.
Yeah.
So we'll make it quick here because the traffic's a bit awkward, but behind me is Mottisfont Social Club. Built by our grandfathers. It actually contains all the memorials to those that died in the First and Second World War. So it is in fact Mottisfont's memorial stone. This actually means it's protected. It was a bit of a clever move at the time. All the other villagers had a simple stone or a pillar and obelisk built with the names. They built it into the walls of their pub. Later on, the National Trust, where it's tried to gentrify this area, has tried to close it down on multiple occasions. They consider it an eyesore. Unfortunately, every time it gets as far as a judge, they simply get told the same thing: you cannot remove a war memorial. So, with a bit of foresight, the village elders that are long now gone have ensured that there is always a little pub in the village that will keep serving beer to local villagers by building their war memorial into the actual pub itself. Fantastic idea, I thought.
Such a British thing as well.
It is quite quintessentially British, isn't it? One of the more interesting things you'll find in Mottisfont area are all the phone boxes are grey, rather than the conventional red of their period, although long since out of use. That's because the lady that owned the land, Maud Russell, who my grandfather was the butler for, she only had two rules. One of them is that phone boxes had to be grey because she saw red ones as an eyesore, and the second, no barbecues on the weekend. She couldn't stand the smell of barbecued meat. But other than that, she was considered quite a good ruler, leader, state owner. But yes, so throughout the country, almost all telephone boxes are bright red, except in this one little village where they're all grey. An interesting but trivial piece of information.
I wonder if I can see if it's bigger on the inside.
It's not the TARDIS. You know that's not a real story, Doctor.
I think it's sort of open. Hey, oh, it's actually spiders inside. No, thank you. I've seen enough. Bye.
So just randomly on our walks, this is Mottisfont Millennium Orchard. Now, when I was a little lad here, this was a dumping ground for a farmer and all his tractors, so it was full of big agricultural machines you could play on and get tetanus for free. And then they've turned it into an orchard. And you've got a selection of things here. We've got a walnut tree growing. We've got look, cooking apples, very young. More cooking apples. Somebody likes their apples. And more apples. So it appears that their Millennium Orchard is mostly
Apples.
apples.
Which I'm okay with. I love the wildflowers, by the way.
Yes, they're quite beautiful. What we fag?
I am getting cynic. Friends!
Yeah, your skin's all falling off. So, this is a nice little place to relax, isn't it?
It is. It is.
But I'll tell you what, Rita. We're having those apples.
We are having
Come August, them apples is ours. It doesn't say do not pick the apples. It's a public orchard. What, they're apples? I'm having them apples.
Have I shown you the lemon still in hopes video?
Lemons now.
Sent you that. That's what it reminds me of. I need to show you that.
But if you do like apples, then Auntie Rita will make you all the apple pie and apple crumble you can get. So we'll fill it with apples.
Oh wow, didn't we cross this field some months ago and this was empty? It's amazing because when we were here months ago, 3 months ago, this field was completely empty. And I was just nearly as tall as me.
It may yield sweet corn in a few months. Sweet corn.
Ow!
What?
Well, I got a really sensitive skin and I'm getting paper cuts on my legs.
Well, by the time you get to the gate at the other end, you'll just have stumps left.
Yes. It's like,
Right,
ooh.
so these animals over here, in Rita's book, are both horses or
No.
don't exist. First of all, she tried to tell me that this field was full of horses, and then she tried to tell me there are no cows in this field. The evidence, chewing cud right there, would indicate otherwise. Those are cows, moo cows. Moo.
It's like,
Moo.
close,
Yes.
far away.
It is a bit like going, this cow is really close, but
Them
those cows are far away. Apart from me swearing every fucking car. Happy roast Ox crisps. The goodies, pack of Ox crisps.
Woo, thank you. Oh.
So, you recognise this photo where we were stood.
One second.
This is where we were stood up here. Do you remember the Tithe barn?
Oh yeah.
And that was the social clubs just there. This is back when it was early roading.
So let me show this to people. So give me the British middle finger.
Happily.
No, not that one. The Churchill one.
That's not the middle finger, that's both fingers.
Yeah, both fingers. That's it. Sorry. Me not speak
There's
English.
a big difference between
So-
this and this, Rita.
So this beautiful packet that you find very innocent, this is actually very offensive in my culture.
Yeah.
This is just as bad as giving the two fingers in Portuguese. Can you
that's-
guess why?
Because we like insulting the Portuguese.
No. If a Portuguese ever does that to you, it means that your wife or your husband or boyfriend, whoever, your best half is cheating on you.
So-
They got the horns.
If I'm in Portugal and a Portuguese person comes up to me like this,
Oh yes.
then
Oh yes. They are.
suggesting that my wife's cheating on me.
Yes. It's called the cornudo.
This.
Yes.
Right. What is more easy, this, or sitting and going,
But we are Latin. We make extra movement.
so do you think we make these crisps, because in the UK we're not allowed to offend anybody but the Portuguese, do you think we make these just to offend the Portuguese?
It's definitely offending me. I demand now a full formal apology from the company online.
Real hand-cooked roast ox, P.S. your wife's shagging somebody else.
Literally, it's what? It's... If someone does that to you in Portugal, they are definitely very mad at you. It's fantastic how, you know...
How backwards you still are, that you have to
Wow.
make animal signs. You still have to make animal signs.
No.
What next? If someone in Portugal does this,
No, because someone who's been cheated on, it's called a cornudo.
a cornudo.
So cornudo comes from cornus. Cornus means horns.
Yeah,
So if you make this, well,
this sign here.
this sign, it means that, yeah, you're a cornudo.
What?
Yeah.
I now got to look at the rest of the crisp packets and just see if the rest of them are just as insulting. Day and night.
Wait, the noise. You just get used to it. Wait, is that our train?
Uh-huh.
Or small little tiny train?
Well, training.
It's just one carriage.
You know you look like a train spotter now. You
Yes.
fucking nerd.
You see?
Marriages, how much have you had to drink?
Ah, so cute.
Sesame Street time. 1, 2. You can't see fucking cows.
Go, 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 go.
It's not going to speed off without you, is it? It's not like ha 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 ha.
What the hell? Open sesame.
You going that way?
Ah, let's do this.
This is Mottisfont and Dunbridge. This train is for Chandler's Ford via Southampton Central. The next station is Romsey.
Yeah.
That's one.
Yeah.
It's warming up. Oh no, don't be the Chandler's Eastleigh cunt. We'll leave you at Southampton Central to bleed
Yep.
out on the platform like a rodent.
Yeah. Then I'll make my change. Focus, focus, focus.
Focus. Focus on me. I'm tired.
Same. It's been only 5 kilometers. Well, almost 6 technically.
6 miles.
Yeah, yeah,
6
yeah.
miles or 5 kilometres.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been a good walk. We've travelled and shown Rita new things. And I don't remember any of it, obviously.
You look so different after a couple of bites.
She's had 2 bites and she can't count to 2. I mean, she couldn't spot cows 6 foot in front of her when she's sober. She's not going to recognise a fucking toad.
I'm sure I had a bush on front of me.
It wasn't a bush in front of you. It was like a nettle that was about this big.
Oh,
It does not hide a cow weighing a ton.
Yeah. Well, half a ton those.
You short-eyed dopey bitch.
Well.
Edit that out.
Oh, 1 second. Ooh, 1 second. Anyways, what's wrong with I'm gonna be.
I'll just flirt my hair shut.
Anyways, this is it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, good.